Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Jacob's smile was quick, but sharp. Those few seconds between the group toast and the sip of champagne marked the exact moment everything turned to ash in John's mind. He knew how to read expressions. He'd grown up watching, listening more than speaking. And that night, at the company holiday party where his wife worked, just one glance was enough to understand what he'd been ignoring for months. Samantha looked beautiful, as always. Elegant, charming, surrounded by co-workers, laughing lightly. The woman John proudly called his wife. It was obvious how much everyone admired her, but the unease had started earlier. Small gestures piling up like loose puzzle pieces he refused to put together. Comments that stopped when he came near, messages she said were from the office group, lingering looks between her and some guy named Jacob Harris, who until then, for John, was just a name mentioned occasionally. That night, John felt especially optimistic. He'd gotten good news, the promotion he'd been chasing for 2 years was close. That would make possible something he and Samantha had planned for a long time. She'd leave her job, focus on home, on starting a family. He knew she was tired of the demanding routine, office pressure, difficult bosses. Everything was falling into place. He could finally see the future taking shape. But then, in the middle of the applause after the manager's speech ended, John saw it. Jacob whispered something in Samantha's ear. She laughed, but it wasn't a polite laugh. It was intimate, a little conspiratorial, almost affectionate. When Jacob noticed John watching, he looked straight at him and smiled. A crooked, ironic smile. He didn't need to say anything. That smile carried contempt, confidence, and challenge. That's when John understood. He didn't need to hear confessions or find messages. Jacob's gesture was the signature of a silent contract. A pact between two men who knew what was going on, even if only one had the courage to admit it. John didn't react impulsively. He just looked away. From the outside, he seemed like a man engaged, taking part in the celebration like everyone else. Inside, he felt the ground slowly giving way. He remembered an incident from adolescence when he blindly trusted a classmate, shared a personal secret, and the next day saw his name scribbled on the school bulletin board with jokes that made him lock himself in the bathroom for hours. From that day on, he swore he'd never be deceived again. He started observing everything. Weighing words, measuring gestures. And it was that skill that made him notice what others at that same party might never have seen. The discomfort grew stronger as the night went on. Samantha seemed more and more at ease, her glances with Jacob becoming more frequent. John tried to find logic, but all he felt inside was noise. He began mentally reviewing the past few months. Last-minute trips, coming home late, less intimacy, cold replies. There was always a ready excuse. And he believed them. Out of love. Out of habit. Because it was easier to hold on to certainty than face collapse. That same night, back home, John took a shower in silence. Samantha excitedly talked about the party, about the new boss who seemed to like her, about the lighter atmosphere at the office after the management change. She spoke while changing clothes, as if everything were normal. As if her words carried any weight. But to him, it was all noise. Lying in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, John felt trapped in a repeating nightmare. So many similar stories around him, so many friends who'd gone through quiet betrayals. There's always a sign, he thought. There always was. But love has this cruel habit of blinding you. Until one smile destroys everything. The next morning, he woke up before her. He made coffee, read part of the newspaper, left for work like always. But internally, he had already changed. In his mind, a plan was forming. Not a plan for confrontation, but for certainty. He needed to confirm. He needed proof. He needed to regain control. What started with a smile would end with something stronger, dignity. That was the day John Simon stopped being a man in love and became a man searching for answers. And unlike at the party, where he only watched and swallowed hard, this time he would write the next scene. And no one would be the last to smile. The morning after the party, John made a quiet decision. It wasn't about intuition anymore, but logic. If there really was something between Samantha and Jacob, then he would go all the way for answers. Not with confrontations or dramatic scenes, but with undeniable proof. That's how he handled anything serious: method, calm, precision. During his work break, he made a short call. He got a discreet referral from an old acquaintance, a guy who handled this kind of thing without making noise. He contacted the private investigator, Mark Dalton, and within hours, their first meeting was set. At the meeting, he got straight to the point. He handed over what he had: Jacob Harris's full name, address, workplace, car model, even the kind of watch he wore. He also provided Samantha's routine: days she said she stayed late at the office, the supposed meetings she mentioned. Mark listened in silence and promised discretion. He said he'd have something in a few days. John just nodded and left. His mind was cold, operating like it was on autopilot. But inside, something was pounding hard. It was the beginning of the end. He just didn't know yet how much pain he was about to harvest. For 3 days, he kept his routine. Work, home, meals, casual conversations with Samantha. She kept acting like everything was fine. She talked about a possible promotion in her department, said Jacob would recommend her for a new internal project. John listened carefully. He didn't react, didn't criticize, didn't question. He just stored it all. Every sentence she said was a new piece on the board. And each day that passed, he felt the board was about to flip. On the night of the 4th day, he received a message from Mark: "We'll talk tomorrow. I have what you need to see." He barely slept. He'd been expecting it, but the weight of confirmation hadn't hit him yet. The next day, leaving work early, he went to the agreed address. Mark greeted him with a serious expression, placed a tablet on the table, and started showing the images. First, photos of Samantha entering Jacob's residential building in the afternoon on a regular weekday. Then leaving later that day. In another image, the two of them entering a quiet restaurant outside the city during business hours on a Tuesday. The records included short videos. In one, Samantha sat in Jacob's car, laughing while playing with her phone. In another, they hugged and kissed before going back into the building. John watched everything in silence. He felt his blood heat up inside his chest, but his face stayed still. It was like watching a movie about someone he once knew, but who no longer existed. Samantha wasn't his wife anymore. She was another woman, living another life, in another reality. A hidden, cowardly reality, built while he was planning a future with her. He stood up, thanked for the service, paid in cash as agreed, and left. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from her saying she'd be late that night because of an emergency meeting at the office. The next morning, he went to the HR department at his company and submitted his resignation. He handed in all the documents, avoided explanations. He simply said he was closing a chapter. The manager tried to convince him to reconsider. John just replied that he needed to take care of his own life for a while. He was decided. And the first change was removing everything standing in the way of his freedom. That same day, he returned home early. Samantha wasn't there. Her calendar said, "Training outside headquarters." John used the time to review the divorce documents with his lawyer. The photos, videos, intercepted message screenshots, everything was documented. His grandmother's ring, which he'd given Samantha as an engagement band, was at the top of the list of things he demanded back. It wasn't just a symbol of union. It was family heritage, family honor. And he refused to leave it in the hands of someone who had deceived him. That same night when Samantha sent the message saying she'd be at an off-site training, John knew exactly what that meant. The images, videos, and timestamps collected by the investigator made it clear where she'd be spending those hours. There was no more doubt, only the need to close the chapter with his own hands. So, as night fell, he drove to Jacob's house, parked in front, and rang the doorbell. Jacob himself opened the door. Wearing shorts and a casual shirt, still holding a wine bottle, he looked relaxed, like life was perfect. John kept his gaze steady and asked to speak with his wife. Jacob raised an eyebrow, surprised by the boldness, and before even calling Samantha, John handed him an envelope. Inside were the divorce papers, the formal demand for the return of his grandmother's ring, and the lawyer's terms. Jacob opened his mouth to mock him, but John cut him off sharply. "Call Samantha." She appeared seconds later, still fixing her loose hair, not expecting who was at the door. When she saw John standing in front of her, her expression froze. The color drained from her face. He extended the envelope without trembling hands. He said it was all decided, there was no room left for excuses or attempts at conversation. Samantha took the envelope with difficulty, as if it weighed more than it actually did. Jacob, in the background, let out a short laugh, trying to downplay the moment. John didn't look away from her and added firmly. "You betrayed me, but you betrayed much more than that. You ripped away the value of an inheritance that came long before us. My grandmother's ring. I want it back." The silence that followed was suffocating. Samantha stammered, tried to say something, but her voice failed. John didn't wait. He glanced quickly at Jacob and finished. "Leave me alone." He turned and walked toward his car. Samantha called his name, her voice broken, begging for a chance to explain. He kept walking without answering. He got in the car and drove away, leaving behind the house that symbolized the end of everything. For the first time in weeks, he breathed with relief. There was no joy, but there was resolve. The cycle was closed. The beginning of his new life was sealed with documents, silence, and the dignity no one could take from him. After delivering the divorce papers at Jacob's door, John returned home with a heavy heart but a determined mind. Samantha was still out, which made everything easier. He entered, opened the closet, took out 2 large suitcases, and began packing only what truly mattered: clothes, documents, a few books, and the photo of his grandmother wearing the ring he had now demanded back. With each folded item, it felt like he was pulling the last threads of a rope already broken. The house, once the space they shared, now felt cold, without a single good memory to save it. Before leaving, he placed the key on the living room table with a short note: "Samantha, it's already decided. This place is no longer my home. Take care of your life, because I'll take care of mine." He locked the door, went down the stairs, and loaded the suitcases into the car. Without looking back, he headed to his cousin's place, where he stayed until he found another apartment. 2 days later, the phone rang. It was Helen, his ex-mother-in-law. Her voice was shaky, filled with sadness. She asked him to come to dinner with the family. She said Samantha was devastated and they needed to talk. John thought about refusing, but decided to go. He needed to close each chapter clearly. That night, he was received with politeness. Helen made sure to prepare a meal like in the old days, trying to recreate a sense of unity, but the air was heavy. Samantha was there, worn down, eyes red from crying. She tried to speak, apologized, said she had lost herself and never imagined her husband would leave her so coldly, so definitively. John listened in silence, without interrupting. When she finished, he simply said this wasn't a stumble, but a conscious choice. A woman doesn't end up at another man's house by accident, nor spends entire days away from home by coincidence. Helen, emotional, tried to intervene, said she loved John like a son, begged him to consider starting over. That's when Helen brought something important. She excused herself, left the table, and came back with a small velvet case. Inside was John's grandmother's ring. She said Samantha had handed it over that afternoon, too ashamed to return it in person. John took the ring firmly, feeling it carried not just metal, but generations of loyalty and respect. He thanked Helen for the gesture, looked at Samantha, and said only, "You took from me something that can't be undone, but this, I would never allow to be lost." He stood up, thanked for the dinner, and said goodbye to his mother-in-law with respect. Before leaving, Helen held his hand and asked him not to carry hatred, because hatred eats you alive. He replied that he carried no hatred, but neither did he carry love anymore. He left with the ring in his pocket and the certainty that this page was turned. In the following days, he settled into a small rented apartment and kept his distance from Samantha. The pain was great, but his dignity remained intact. That's when Ron Mueller, his best man and longtime friend, showed up. He brought coffee, a few folders under his arm, and the honesty that always defined him. He said he'd seen men destroy themselves after betrayals, but John shouldn't waste his life on regret. Turn this pain into strategy, he advised. Then, he showed information he'd uncovered himself. Jacob was involved in a new venture with foreign investors, and Samantha, without a stable job after the scandal, was a hidden partner in the deal. John listened in silence, but something inside him stirred. It wasn't just about moving on anymore. Now there was a chance to settle the score calmly and calculatedly, without raising his voice, without chasing revenge through impulsive acts. Just using intelligence, time, and patience. And in that moment, the seed of the retaliation plan began to grow. Not just any revenge, but something that would hit Jacob and Samantha where it hurt most, in what they thought was their future. John no longer needed confrontations. He just needed to wait for the right moment to act. The following days turned into a chessboard. Ron brought contacts and opened doors John didn't even know existed. Mark's report showed Jacob was inflating numbers to impress an overseas investor, a fund looking for local partners quickly and with little patience for details. Samantha appeared in emails as a silent partner, offering access and efficiency in exchange for a future share. There was a timeline of targets and a schedule for capital injections. All it needed was a small push for the structure to start cracking. John entered from the side. An intermediary introduced Northbridge Partners, offering bridge capital with clear governance clauses and purchase preference if cash flow tightened. Jacob signed without reading carefully. Samantha celebrated in short messages. They thought they'd won the game before the whistle. The first move came with a light audit, standard contract procedure. The numbers Jacob had adjusted created a gap. The second move was freezing part of the credit until certain issues were resolved. Spreadsheets started to lag, suppliers demanded guarantees, the original investor pulled back slightly. It was enough for Northbridge to exercise its right of preference and buy additional shares at a reduced price. Within weeks, John, behind the scenes, went from observer to controller. The document that sealed it all had 2 pages and one decisive paragraph. The newly formed board could change executive leadership immediately. The transition meeting was set for a Tuesday. Ron stood beside Northbridge's lawyer. Mark took the front row as consultant. When Jacob entered, his confident smile cracked at the sight of unfamiliar names at the table. Samantha arrived minutes later, with a notebook she'd never use. John entered last, unannounced. He sat down, calmly opened his folder, and placed the new board's appointment minutes on the table. Jacob shifted in his seat, trying to keep composure. He asked who represented the investor. John answered with a simple sentence, "Me." Silence. Samantha put a hand to her chest, as if gasping for air. John didn't give a speech, didn't mention the past, didn't bring the marriage into that room. He spoke about numbers, deadlines, conduct. He announced Jacob's removal from the executive role, the suspension of Samantha's strategic consulting contract, and the review of all agreements signed in the last 2 months. He handed over the written notices. He stated the deadline for office departure. Jacob tried to joke, tossed out an empty provocation. John stuck to the agenda, voted on the items, closed the session, and stood. No shouting. No humiliation. Just consequences. Outside, Samantha waited. She asked for 5 minutes. John granted it. She said she'd made a mistake, let herself be swept away by promises, thought Jacob would give her a prominent place, that her career was worth the risk. She said she still loved him, that this path could be reversed. He listened to the end. He replied calmly that love and loyalty walk together. When one leaves the room, the other loses its way. The conversation ended there. Ron touched his friend's shoulder, and the two walked away. The building was left behind like a chapter stamped with the word, completed. The following weeks were quiet. John organized his new home, returned to running in the late afternoons, started cooking simple meals again, began sleeping without waking in panic. At work, he established a clean routine with his team. He fired who needed to go and opened positions for people who wanted to build seriously. Mark closed the contract with a handshake and his usual blunt line, "Mission accomplished." Ron stopped by on a Friday with pizza and the joke that revenge with accounting is a work of art. John laughed, but inside he felt something else. It wasn't victory. It was balance. The brown envelope arrived with no return address. Inside, a 6-page letter. Samantha's handwriting filled every line, as if she were trying to build a bridge with ink. She wrote that Jacob was already looking for another partner to rebuild the project, that he'd sidelined her the moment Northbridge took control. She said she realized too late what she'd had at home. She recalled memories, mentioned trips, brought up the day he was sick, and she stayed up caring for him until she fell asleep on the couch. She apologized again. She asked if there was any chance to start over. She asked if he still thought of her. John read it slowly, not skipping a line, giving those words the respect of a past that had once been real. He folded the letter, kept it overnight, and only then decided what to do. The next day, he opened the drawer where the wedding photo Helen had returned to him sat. Next to it, the case with his grandmother's ring. He took a plain black notebook, the kind from a stationery store, and wrote a single page. It wasn't a reply to Samantha, it was a message to himself, the kind a man writes when he needs to be sure of who he wants to be from here on. I got up from where I was knocked down without calling an audience. I refused the madness of fighting small people. I protected my grandmother's name and my own. I lost what I loved, but I kept what holds me up. From today on, anything I build will be made of real bricks, character. He closed the notebook and placed it beside the case. Samantha's letter turned to ash in seconds over the metal sink, because some things, once turned to smoke, stop hurting. John opened the window to let the air in and stood there for a while, staring at nothing, like someone clearing their mind to make space. Then, he picked up the phone and called Helen. Not to talk about Samantha, but to thank her for the gesture with the ring and to ask if she needed anything. Helen, surprised, said she was fine, but hearing your voice makes me believe good people are rare, but they exist. He smiled warmly. Later, he anonymously transferred a donation to a local initiative helping women restart their careers after abusive work environments. In the reason field, he wrote only, "In the name of a woman who taught me the value of a ring, and another who needs to remember the value of her own name." At the end of the quarter, the company he'd taken over began to breathe. Honest contracts, clear goals, reports without shortcuts. At the final meeting of that cycle, John asked to speak. He looked at the team and said, "What holds up a company is the same thing that holds up a home, truth." The room fell into a good kind of silence, the kind that means understanding. On the way out, Ron joked that he'd become the boss everyone wanted, and John just replied that he was trying to be the man he promised to be the last time he looked into his grandmother's eyes. At night, at home, he opened the case, held the family ring for a moment, and put it back in its place. He taped the wedding photo to the back of the notebook, not out of nostalgia, but as a record. There was love, there was failure, there was choice. He turned off the lights and went to sleep with the simple peace of someone who closed a chapter firmly and without drama. The world outside kept moving. His, finally, had direction. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.